Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are traveling deep into the spring and summer of 1917. It's maybe the most critical turning point in modern Russian history.
Absolutely. The Tsar is gone, the monarchy's finished.
And Russia is trying out democracy, all while still stuck in the horror of World War I.
It was an impossible situation, really. This new provisional government had overwhelming pressure.
How so?
Well, deliver on revolutionary promises, peace, land, but also somehow honor Russia's commitments to its allies, the Entente.
And that brings us to today's topic.
Exactly. We're exploring the moment those pressures just violently collided. The Kerensky Offensive.
Yeah.
July 1917. Just 19 days.
This was meant to be Russia's big last push, wasn't it? Restore discipline, stabilize the government, maybe get some leverage.
That was the hope. But, what we see in the historical record is, well, the opposite. It was a catastrophic failure.
How catastrophic?
It basically destroyed the provisional government's credibility. And it directly opened the door for the Bolsheviks just a few months later. A self-inflicted wound, really. A political suicide mission.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before a single shot was fired, we really need to grasp the political chaos back in Petrograd.
You have to start with dual power. It's fundamental. After the February Revolution, power wasn't in one place.
Right, it was split.
You had the liberal provisional government from the old Duma trying to run things, and then literally across the hall in the Tauride Palace, the Petrograd Soviet representing soldiers, workers.
And they clashed immediately.
Instantly. The provisional government felt this patriotic duty to keep fighting the war. They needed allied loans. They believed in winning.
But the Soviet?
The soldiers, the workers, they were demanding peace without annexations or reparations. That was the slogan.
And this is where Alexander Kerensky comes in.
Exactly. That tension kind of vaulted him into the Minister of War role. He was popular, a socialist, seen as a bridge.
But crucially,
he supported continuing the offensive. He became the face of the war effort for this government that was, frankly, desperate to avoid bankruptcy and keep some international standing.
Okay, so that's the political side. Meanwhile, the army itself, it's going through this radical, almost forced democratization. How did that affect the will to fight?
Oh, it was chaos, sheer chaos. The revolutionary spirit just immediately undermined officer authority.
You mean Order Number 1?
Yeah, the infamous Order Number 1 from the Soviet. It was meant to improve soldiers' rights, give them dignity, but at the front.
How was it interpreted there?
It was often taken as, the right to elect your officers, ignore orders you didn't like politically.
So this army democracy, you get these elected soldiers committees popping up, often run by radical NCOs.
Precisely. And officers had to negotiate with them. Discipline just crumbled.
And we see this weird trend in the sources, don't we?
Yeah.
Desertion actually decreased a bit right at the front lines.
Yeah, but it exploded in the rear areas. The reserve units, the support troops, the guys you actually need to launch an offensive, they were melting away.
Given all that, launching a huge attack sounds almost insane. What was the thinking? What drove Kerensky to risk everything on this?
It really boils down to desperation, I think, and the clock ticking. First, the Allies were pushing hard.
Threatening to cut off money.
Absolutely. Threatening to withhold vital loans Russia desperately needed. It was economic blackmail, basically.
And the second reason?
Kerensky and the military leadership, people like Brusilov, they genuinely believed that if the army just sat idle, it would completely disintegrate. They hoped action, maybe a quick win, would somehow pull the nation together, restore unity.
A gamble, then.
A huge gamble. And Kerensky had this other hope, too, a kind of high-stakes diplomatic angle.
Which was?
That maybe, just maybe, a military success would force Britain and France to renegotiate the whole war effort along Russia's new revolutionary lines, self-determination, no annexations.
So it was aimed at the peace table as much as the battlefield.
You could definitely honor that. It was a massive political calculation as much as a military one.
Okay, let's shift focus to the front lines. Despite all this collapsing discipline, Russia still had this enormous army on paper. What did the actual order of battle look like for the offensive?
Well, what's really fascinating is how divided the force was. The regular infantry regiments, they were largely demoralized, unreliable. You couldn't count on them.
So who could they count on?
The high command, the Stavka, they ended up relying heavily on these pockets of loyalty. The Cossacks, always loyal. The artillery units, often more professional. Officer cadets.
And the new units.
And most significantly, these brand new shock battalions.
Ah, yes, the battalions of death. Here's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? These were volunteer units.
Exactly. Volunteers. Zealous soldiers, even some civilians. They were meant to be the spearhead, the tip of the lance.
But you're saying their creation was actually a problem.
It was a fatal flaw, arguably, because when you concentrate all your most motivated, most reliable fighters into these elite units,
you leave the regular units even weaker.
Precisely. It just hollowed out the rest of the army, drained the morale and reliability from the vast majority of the infantrymen who were supposed to follow up.
Wow. And there was even a women's battalion?
Yes. The famous, though very small, Women's Battalion of Death, formed quite explicitly, the sources say, to shame the male soldiers into fighting. Talk about desperation.
So on paper, Russia looked strong.
Wow.
Huge numbers, but psychologically.
Psychologically, the army was brittle, hollowed out, ready to crack.
And who were they facing? Who was waiting for them across the trenches?
They were up against Army Group Boomer Moli. It was a mix.
Meaning?
Meaning it included some weaker Austro-Hungarian armies, which the Russians hoped to break through easily. But, and this is a big but, the front was significantly reinforced by the very capable German-commanded South Army. And crucially, the German High Command, the OHL, knew exactly what was coming.
And weren't caught by surprise. How did they know?
Nope, not surprised at all. They had excellent reconnaissance, plus information from Russian deserters who were, streaming across the lines.
So the Germans were ready.
They were more than ready. They'd actually moved several divisions, maybe 6 or 7, plus heavy artillery, all the way from the Western Front, specifically to meet this attack and prepare their own counterpunch.
So you got this contrast. A demoralized, revolutionary Russian army attacking prepared, reinforced German-led defenses. That doesn't sound good.
It's the core problem. The strategic goal was Lemberg in Galicia, a major city, symbolic prize.
And the risk.
Everyone knew the risk. If this failed, Russia's ability to launch any offensive ever again was finished. And politically, it would hand incredible power to the anti-war Bolsheviks.
The stakes couldn't have been higher. So the moment arrives. Late June, early July 1917, the artillery barrage starts.
June 29th, the guns open up. A massive bombardment. Then, July 1st, the infantry goes over the top.
And what happened? Did they break through?
Initially, yes. There was some success. But it was driven almost entirely by those elite units we talked about.
But shock battalions.
The shock battalions, yeah, and other reliable units like the Czechoslovak brigades who are highly motivated, fighting for their own future nation.
And they made ground.
They did. They breached the Austrian lines in places, advanced several miles, took something like 18,000 prisoners in just the first couple of days.
That must have given Kerensky a flicker of hope.
Oh, absolutely. Brief, but real hope. But the momentum, it was incredibly fragile, very fleeting.
Why? What happened?
Well, the main attack by the 11th Army quickly stalled, so the focus shifted south to General Lavr Kornilov's 8th Army.
Ah, Kornilov. He becomes important later. Did he do better?
He did. His forces made the most significant gains of the whole offensive, advanced maybe 15, 20 miles, captured key towns like Stanislaw, Galicia, Kalush.
Why was he more successful? Weaker opposition?
Partly that, yes. Weaker Austrian defenses in his sector. But Kornilov also showed this ruthless, pragmatic leadership. He actually formed committees of agitators to motivate troops, but sources also mention him using machine guns and artillery on his own retreating units to force them back into the fight.
Wow. That's not exactly inspired leadership.
It's coercion, plain and simple. It shows how desperate the situation was. That's not a functional army. It's holding back a collapse by force.
And Kornilov's success had an unintended consequence, right, for the Germans?
Ironically, yes. His breakthrough forced the German High Command to divert divisions they'd planned for their own counteroffensive further north. They had to send them south to stop Kornilov and stabilize the Austrian front there.
But even Kornilov's gains weren't enough to carry the whole offensive. Why did the momentum just die out everywhere else?
Simple exhaustion and refusal. Those initial shock troops, they were spent after just a few days of heavy fighting. And the regular infantry units behind them.
They wouldn't move up?
They just wouldn't. They refused to advance. The 11th Army, the main effort, basically ground to a halt after maybe 5 kilometers.
Yeah.
Dug in.
Were there other failures? Logistics?
Huge failures. There are reports of attacks going in where the promised artillery barrage never happened. Like the 1st Guards Corps near Kamuki charged right into intact enemy fortifications. Devastating losses.
Imagine that. Charging into machine guns because your own artillery failed. The effect on morale.
Exactly. It spread like wildfire. Units held in reserve because they were seen as less enthusiastic. They refused to go forward to help the units getting chewed up at the front. By mid-July, the whole offensive had basically just stopped. The Revolutionary Army had run out of steam.
And that pause.
Yeah.
That gave the Germans their chance.
It gave the Central Powers exactly the opening they needed. They'd been preparing that counterpunch.
And when they launched it, it wasn't pretty for the Russians.
Not at all. The German counteroffensive kicked off on July 19th. They hit the northern part of the bulge created by the initial Russian advance, targeting the weakened 11th Army.
And the Russians held.
They collapsed. It wasn't really a battle. It was more like a domino effect, as you said earlier.
How bad was it?
Despite the Russians still having numerical superiority in the sector, the 11th Army just immediately retreated. Within days, the 7th Army next to them was hit, and the retreat turned into a full-blown rout.
A rout, not an orderly withdrawal.
No, a rout. They lost all the ground they'd gained, lost all the ground gained in the previous year's Brusilov offensive, and then some. The army fell back as much as 120 kilometers, that's 75 miles in some places.
Total chaos then.
Utter chaos. The sources describe terrible scenes. Discipline completely vanished. Soldiers started looting, committing crimes against the local populations in Galicia and Ukraine as they retreated.
And desertion.
Skyrocketed. Estimates vary, but figures suggest maybe over 42,000 men deserted during the offensive and the subsequent retreat. The army was just disintegrating.
And this failure wasn't just in Galicia, right? Weren't there supporting attacks planned elsewhere?
There were, yes. On the northern and western fronts. Further north, aimed towards Vilnius. General Denikin commanded on the western front.
How did they go?
Disastrously.
Yeah.
Utter failures. Large units simply refused orders to attack. In some cases, only the officers and maybe a few loyal shock companies actually advanced, only to be isolated and cut down. It just confirmed the total collapse of will.
But wasn't there one area where things went slightly better, down south?
Ah, yes. The exception that proves the rule, perhaps. The Russo-Romanian campaign in the summer of 1917.
What happened there?
Down there, particularly in the battles of Măriăti, and Orcutiz, things were different. The Romanian army had been rebuilt after earlier defeats. Their morale was much higher.
And the Russian units supporting them.
The Russian units there were generally less affected by the revolutionary chaos emanating from Petrograd. Command structures held up better. And together, the Romanians and Russians actually managed to achieve some success, pushing back the Central Powers, recapturing territory.
So it was possible to fight effectively still.
It showed what could be done, yes. When morale held, when command was effective, when units were willing, it prevented the total collapse of Romania, which was a significant achievement in itself.
But that success was isolated. The main offensive in Galicia was an unmitigated disaster. And the cost? The leadership must have been in despair.
Complete despair. The sheer scale of the military collapse, the reports of atrocities during the retreat, it immediately triggered a political reaction.
What kind of reaction?
A demand for order. For discipline, for martial law, essentially, from the more conservative and moderate elements in the government and the military command. Kornilov was chief among them.
So the political fallout was instant.
Instantaneous and irreversible. Kerensky, facing this total mess, a disintegrating army, chaos, reports of soldiers running wild, he felt he had no choice.
What did he do?
He caved to the pressure. He approved restoring the death penalty at the front. He moved to limit the power of those soldiers' committees. He basically tried to cancel his own earlier declaration of soldiers' rights.
Trying to put the revolutionary genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. But you can't really do that. The ordinary soldiers, the rank and file, they saw these moves completely differently.
How did they see it?
They saw it as the provisional government siding with the old guard, the counter-revolutionary officers. They felt utterly betrayed. Restoring the death penalty, that was the ultimate betrayal in their eyes.
And meanwhile, the one general who'd had any success, Kornilov.
Right. Lav Kornilov. Because his 8th Army had performed relatively better, he was suddenly the man of the hour for those demanding order.
So he gets promoted.
Promoted rapidly. First to command the whole southwestern front. Then, by July 31st, Kerensky appoints him supreme commander of all Russian armies.
Wow. Kerensky appoints the strong man he thinks he needs.
Only to find he's handed his biggest rival the power needed to eventually try and overthrow him. The irony is just incredibly thick.
And all this is happening alongside turmoil in the capital itself, right? The July days.
Yes, the July days crisis unfolds right as the offensive is collapsing. Huge protests, riots in Petrograd.
What sparked those?
Partly fueled by news of the offensive failing, but also by garrison soldiers in Petrograd terrified they'd be sent to the front to fill the gaps. They didn't want to go.
And Kerensky's response.
He brought in loyal troops from the front to violently crush the uprising, which further alienated the Petrograd masses.
This seems like the moment the moderate socialists lost control.
It absolutely is. The moderate leaders in the Soviet, the Mensheviks and SRs who had, crucially, supported the offensive, they lost all credibility with the soldiers and workers. Their gamble had failed spectacularly. A massive political vacuum. And the Bolsheviks, even though they were initially hesitant during the July days and got blamed for it, they were perfectly positioned to step into that vacuum. Their simple message, peace, land, bread, suddenly sounded very appealing.
So the failed offensive leads directly to the Kornilov affair.
Directly. Kornilov, now supreme commander and backed by conservative forces who saw him as the savior of Russia, launched a coup attempt in September, aimed at getting rid of Kerensky and the Soviets.
And this is where the ultimate irony of the Kerensky Offensive plays out.
It truly is. The coup failed miserably. Why? Because Kornilov's own troops, the soldiers he was counting on, refused to march on Petrograd. They wouldn't fight against the revolution.
So Kerensky survives,
but only just. And in his desperation to stop Kornilov, who does he have to turn to for defense?
The Soviets.
The Soviets, and crucially, the Bolsheviks within the Soviets. Kerensky was forced to release Bolshevik leaders he'd imprisoned after the July days, people like Trotsky.
And he armed them.
This is key. He authorized the arming of around 25,000 Bolshevik Red Guards to defend the capital against Kornilov. He literally gave guns to the very people who would overthrow him weeks later.
Incredible.
The whole affair just shattered any remaining trust between the soldiers and the high command. It massively boosted Bolshevik influence, not just in Petrograd, but all across the front. They gained majorities in the Petrograd and Moscow Soviets.
And the path to October was clear.
Shockingly short and incredibly direct. The failed July offensive wasn't just the last gasp of the Russian army in the war. It was the trigger, the mechanism that destroyed the provisional government and paved the way for the Bolshevik Revolution.
So, reflecting on this, the Kerensky Offensive is more than just a battle, isn't it?
Oh, far more. It's really the symbolic end of Russia's fighting spirit in World War I. But more than that, it's a stark illustration of just how fragile a mass army becomes when it's caught in the middle of a deep social and political revolution.
It wasn't just a military mistake.
It was political suicide. Kerensky and the provisional government gambled the last shreds of loyalty they had among the soldiers, and they lost everything.
An incredibly high price to pay for just 19 days of fighting.
That devastating price.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into, well, one of history's most consequential military failures.
Oh, my pleasure.
And here's a final thought for you, something to mull over. The Kerensky Offensive failed utterly in its own military and political aims. But think about this. It inadvertently created the conditions and, perhaps more critically, armed the very forces, those 25,000 Red Guards that would sweep away the revolutionary government that launched it just a few months later.
It's a powerful reminder of how history turns on unexpected hinges. Keep exploring that collision of ideas and reality in 1917. We'll see you next time.